All right, I want to welcome everybody to episode 3 of my series, The Strange and Unexplained Phenomena of the South Mountains of North Carolina. I am your host, content creator, researcher, investigator, lifelong outdoorsman, and an aspiring author, Kaiser Rebel. We're going to jump right into it. I've got a lot to talk about in just 10 minutes. But it's some events that span the time period from November 2018 until August of this year. And the title of this episode is, Are They Trying to Hurt Us? In the 4th week of November of 2018, a father-son duo ascended a ridge and separated and went to their respective deer stands. But we're going to focus on the son, young Calvin. He's a very experienced, mature for his age young man who had hunted since he was very small and was a very capable hunter and outdoorsman. But he got into his tree stand at 4:30 that morning and simply began to wait for sunup. And he said that about 4:45, he heard the distinct sound of footsteps. And as an experienced hunter, he said that he knew that it was something walking on 2 feet. And the footsteps got closer and closer. And suddenly, the footsteps became slower and more deliberate. And it put him in mind, and I agree with him, that his position was being stalked by something. And then the footsteps stopped. Within a few minutes, he heard what he described as some ape-like whooping. It went on just for a minute or two, and that stopped. And by then, he was frightened, according to his testimony, but just being on high alert and listening and intently watching into the darkness. And suddenly he heard the sound of something crashing through the tree limbs. And he said that he just instinctively knew something had been thrown. He heard a thud, and the tree in which he was in vibrated. It struck the tree in which he was sitting. And by then he was ready to go, but he did not want to descend out of the tree stand. And I think that was a very wise move. It's better to stay 24 feet up than down on the forest floor, and you don't know what's going on. The next morning, they got out of the tree stands, and he found a large rock, a little smaller than a volleyball, had hit the tree that he was in. It had knocked bark off the tree, which was a large tree, and also dented the wood underlying the bark. So it was thrown with tremendous force. Not only did they not harvest a deer that morning, but he and his father said that they saw nothing. No deer, no raccoons, no skunks, nothing, which is very unusual for this area. I, along with the retired deputy sheriff from Burke County, investigated this. We saw the rock, the damaged tree, and we found about 35 yards from where his tree stand was, something very large had been bedding down there. And young Calvin asked me, he said, "Are they trying to hurt us?" And we both agreed that it's just probably not a good idea to ever go into these woods after dark by yourself. The second event I want to tell you about was a group of hikers, night hikers. And they were hiking a high ridge, not far from where I am right now as I record this. And they were doing it for fun. They were talking, laughing, no reason to be quiet or not use their flashlights. And as they descended the end of the ridge, the group was caught by surprise by, again, the sound of something crashing through the trees. A large rock came in from their right and impacted, almost hitting one of the members of the hiking party, and there were 5 of them. They stopped, certainly not expecting that, and they listened and observed, and nothing else happened, and they went back to their camp. Nothing else of note happened the rest of the night, except to say that at about 3:30 in the morning, from several locations around them, they heard the sound of a low-frequency growling howl, and they felt as though they were surrounded, and that's horrifying. I've been in that position, and it is truly horrifying. 2 of the members of the group has not been back since. The third event I want to tell you about, 2 people, and one of those people was me. We were out scouting areas along creeks and along the Broad River looking for footprints. And we came to a bridge on a dirt road, and underneath it we found one single print on a sandbar in the middle of the river. And the print was 3.5 inches deep, and from the water line to the print it was 4 feet, and from the print to the other water line in the direction of travel it was 4 feet, meaning whatever made that print had the weight sufficient to depress its foot 3.5 inches into hard packed rocky sand, and it had a stride of 4 feet at least. We took pictures of it, and we got in my friend's brand new Jeep, and we commenced driving up the dirt road, and about 150, 200 feet away, suddenly something hit the Jeep. I thought that one of the windows had been blown out. I thought that we had been shot at. But the driver, my friend, said that it hit the roof above his head, and it was apparent to him something had been thrown. And I said, do you want to go back and look for the rock or check the damage? He said, no. So we got back to my place, and in the top of his Jeep was a very large gouge. The rock, which we never found because it had gone off the Jeep into the woods, down a hill, was large and hit it hard enough to damage his new Jeep. He wasn't mad. He said that was a pretty good way to damage a Jeep if you're going to damage a Jeep. And he has not been back on those excursions with me. The fourth and final event that I want to tell you about is probably the most horrifying. Two people, Ray, who we've talked about before, and his friend Vera, were creek walking. Now, creek walking is simply where you walk in the creek rather than hiking along the sides of the creek, and the advantage to that is that you don't have to negotiate the thick foliage of the creek bottom, and this was in August of this year. But they were creek walking for fun. But they were aware of the reputation of this area and had had some experiences. And as they hiked in the creek, they came to a point to stop to take a water break and rest. And Ray, being somewhat mischievous, enjoying the prospect of aggravating Vera, picked up a stick and swatted a tree twice, mimicking a wood knock, which we've talked about on previous episodes. This was at 4 o'clock, broad daylight. Now, I can tell you from my experience, you don't hear many sounds or vocalizations before dark. I've heard 5 vocalizations in 10 years, or wood knocks, combination thereof, before dark in 10 years. But immediately after he hit that tree off to their right, which had been to their east, something hit a tree, and it hit it with a large piece of wood. Ray pictured maybe a semi-rotted log. It hit the tree, and it could hear the sound of what hit the tree breaking, and that it was very, very close. He felt that it was 100 feet or less. Now, 100 feet might as well be a mile in the foliage of these creek bottoms during the summer. But immediately, within a couple of seconds after that one, on the opposite side of the creek, and they heard another sharp, very sharp, distinct wood knock. And he reported that one too was also very close to them. So he convinced his friend to just stop, and they wanted to watch and observe and listen. And nothing else occurred. And they began walking again. And roughly about 5 minutes later, without warning, without any of the precursory sounds, a rock was thrown, narrowly missing Vera's head by inches. It was thrown from their left, went over her head, and impacted the creek next to them. And it was a piece of quartz, slightly smaller than a softball. And had that hit her in the head or him, it would have sent him to the hospital, seriously hurt him, if not killed him. They didn't stop and observe or listen. They kept going. And as they were moving along at a hurried pace, they began to hear the distinct sound of whooping and sort of a low frequency growling howl that was very close to them. And they have not been back since. Thank you all. See you next week.